Hello, everyone. Sam here, and we got to talk about The Magician from Mars. This is a part of the Rocket Summer 2026 reading event, and this is also a new episode of Comic Crazed, my review show focused on comic books. Magician from Mars is one of the many science fiction stories that dominated in the golden age of comics. There were a whole lot of comic books fixated on science fiction concepts. So this was a natural choice for Rocket Summer because this was very much coming out in the golden age of science fiction, not just in literature, but in comics. So the Magician from Mars was a backup character, just like the last character I talked about, the Spider Queen. The Magician from Mars was a shorter page count character that was done in the back pages of a comic book instead of being the main feature. And as it says here on the front, the Magician from Mars appeared in Amazing Man Comics number 7 to number 11, which came out from November 1939 to April 1940. So these were very early in terms of the history of comic books. And as the name of that publication implies, the main character Amazing Man Comics focused on was a superhero called Amazing Man. And Amazing Man and Magician from Mars came from the comic book publisher Centaur Publications. And Centaur Publications were relatively short-lived on the comic book market. They only existed from 1938 to 1942. But they were not just one of the earliest comic book publishers, but they actually created a lot of really early superheroes. And that was kind of their main market during their short existence. Amazing Man was kind of their most well-known, but they had a couple of others that came around. And they're very interesting to read about in terms of those comic book publishers that only were around for a few years but had a significant impact on the industry. But talking specifically about Magician from Mars, she was created by two comic book writers slash artists. And the first one was John Giunta, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, and Malcolm Kildale. John Giunta is more well-known because he was apparently a well-known artist on the comic books Tomb of Terror and Strange Tales. He has a bit of a name for himself working on those publications. Malcolm Kildale was another artist and writer who I couldn't find a whole lot of information about, but he was a frequent artist and writer who worked in comics during this period of the industry. In regards to who was the writer and who was the artist for the Magician of Mars, that's kind of unclear based on the research I wrote. It might have been Giunta drew and Kildale wrote, or the opposite, or it could be they both did some writing and art. Because in the early days of comics, there were a lot of art studios where artists would work on one comic together. Sometimes they would do separate comic stories within the same issue, but other times they would do art and sometimes finish each other's art. It was a very wacky time for artists. But but regardless of who did what, the creators are stated to be John Giunta and Malcolm Kildale. Now, for the 5 stories that the Magician from Mars appeared, John Giunta was on all of them. He did work on all 5 stories, but Kildale only worked on her first appearance. After that, he was replaced by another artist by the name of Michael Mirando. And again, it's somebody I can't find much information about, so there wasn't even a picture or a drawing of him, so I don't know really who he is, but Mirando did the remaining 4 Magician from Mars stories. And one interesting tidbit about Magician from Mars is that it was evidently meant to go on longer because the story actually ends on a cliffhanger with the very last issue. Basically, the Magician from Mars undergoes a terrible tragedy, and she declares vengeance against the villain who has wronged her. But since that was the 5th and final story, that never came to pass. So this is one of those interesting ones where the story has a cliffhanger ending that was never concluded, which was surprisingly common in early days of comics, because sometimes when a book went bust, nobody bothered to finish the story. So in regards to why I got this collection from Guandanaland Comics, this is another Guandanaland Comics output. I got this partially because a few years ago there was a new pulp publisher by the name of Prose Productions, and they had put out a call to writers to do different anthologies with public domain comic book characters. Magician from Mars was one of them, and it was actually one of the few that they wanted a specific collection for. They wanted a bunch of short stories from different authors talking about Magician from Mars, hopefully to conclude her story, or just tell other stories before that cliffhanger. And so I got this mostly because I wanted to research, see if I could do anything for that anthology. But within the last 2 years, Prose Productions went out of business. The details are a little scarce. I talked with one of the head editors from the that particular company, and it was kind of vague, but they went out of business, and thus the Magician from Mars collection never came to be, the new story collection. So since I never got to do that, I figured, well, might as well do a review of it and talk about the character as she was written. So what is the plot of The Magician from Mars? Well, the plot is that the story deals with a woman by the name of Jane QX3. She had another name. I wrote it down here. It was called Jane 6EM35. I think they shortened it just so it was a little easier to read. But Jane is a woman who is the daughter of a Martian father and an Earth woman. Her father was a Martian, her mother was an Earth woman. And she lives on Mars in this unspecified future age where space travel between Earth and Mars is commonplace. And the Earth people are one people and Mars people are another. They're not related by blood. They evolve separately, but there's a lot of trade and communication and travel between each of them. And Jane is born on Mars, but soon after her birth, she's exposed to a cathode ray. And normally, as a Martian, if she was a pure Martian or a pure Earth woman, it wouldn't really do anything. But due to the fact that she's a mixed heritage individual, this exposure to the cathode ray gives her access to 100% of her brain power. It's that old thing about how, mankind only has access to 10% of their brain, which isn't true, by the way. Everyone has 100% access to their brain barring any injuries to the brain or defects. But this is comic book world, so she gets access to 100% of her brain. And when she's a young girl, she realizes she has gained the ability to manipulate reality. How having 100% access to her brain does that, I don't know. But again, it's a comic book, so you just roll with it. But as she grows up and she discovers her powers, her parents die. We don't quite know why, but they die somehow over the years. And she's taken in by her aunt. And her aunt, for some reason, really does not want her going to Earth. Because Jane is kind of has this longing to visit her mother's homeland. But the aunt doesn't want her to, so she keeps Jane on Mars. But one day Jane decides, all right, I have all these abilities. I'm just going to escape and go to Earth. And so she does. And she goes on a rocket ship to Earth and has a bunch of adventures there. And by this point in her life, she's developed a bunch of other powers, partially due to her reality warping abilities. These include super strength, telekinesis, gravity manipulation, illusions, matter manipulation, and immortality. Presumably these all come from her reality warping abilities, or maybe it's because 100% of the brain you can manipulate the gravity around you. Again, don't think too much about the logic of these powers. But she also, as the series goes on, becomes an amazing pilot of airships and rocket ships. That one is kind of explained, but again, because these are very brief stories, it's not explained in depth. So that's the essential premise of it. And as she goes on these adventures on Earth, she becomes known as the Magician from Mars by the Earth people who are saved by her. And like I said, the stories are really brief. Each one is only about 7 pages long. But some of them, there's a heck of a lot packed into the 7 pages in a very amusing slapstick sort of way. And one of the reasons I'm doing this for Rocket Summer is that this takes place in a future world where space travel is very common. So this very much qualifies as a science fiction tale. So I'll do this issue by issue. The first issue is largely the origin story of Jane, showing how as a young girl she started to learn her powers, and then showing how after she escapes her aunt, how she gets to Earth. And this first one is kind of interesting because the story initially frames Jane as kind of an anti-heroine. She's not really a hero in this first issue because there's a lot of things where when she's a girl, she keeps making things to amuse her, destroying things to amuse her, and she's only brought in line by her mother telling, hey, don't do that. But even when she's older, she does things like mess with the rocket ship crew she's on, because the rocket ship gets hit by an asteroid and they're trying to save the ship. But she essentially gaslights the rocket crew by fixing the problems when they're not looking and making them go, wait, how did they get fixed? We had all these notifications that there was a leak in the hull, but she fixes them all without like telling anybody, or she doesn't just like, push the asteroid away or block it. She lets the ship get damaged and then messes with the crew's minds while she fixes the ship. So again, not a terribly heroic gesture. And also on the ship, while that asteroid's hitting, she uses her powers to steal $3 million worth of gold from the ship's vault. And she keeps half of it to fund her adventures on Earth, though she does give half of the money to this doctor who's trying to cure, I believe it was childhood paralysis. Remember, polio was still a big problem at this time in history, so I think the authors just kind of went, all right, she should do something nice. Let's choose a disease that's a big talking point at the time. And polio was still at the time, so again, there's sort of an element of goodness to her for doing that, but a lot of the story is her basically doing whatever she wants for her own selfish whims. And you could argue that most of it is not malevolent, but definitely not fully good either. So that's actually kind of interesting that they start off the character being kind of self-centered and selfish, if only a little tinge of goodness to her. So that's actually a very interesting way to start the character as an origin. However, this also kind of brings up the biggest problem with Jane going forward in the series, which is she is insanely overpowered. Because besides those powers I've already listed, she's a reality warper, which means anything she wants to happen, happens. She can manipulate any form of matter. She can't be hurt by anything. She's essentially immortal. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's a bit of a hard thing to make your superhero feel like she might have a legitimate threat, because she's so overpowered that you can't really see a villain being any kind of threat to her. So already the story has kind of set up a problem in regards to this character's central conceit. So yeah, that does become an issue going forward. Here, it's not as much an issue because there's no real villain in this one, aside from maybe the ant. But yeah, it does become a much more notable problem going forward. So issue number 2 shows Jane essentially, during her trip on Earth, she's enjoying all the luxuries of Earth because she's got $1.5 million she stole from the rocket ship. And it shows her, essentially her growth into a hero. She starts helping out these random assortment of people, from this man who tries to commit suicide because of a dispute he has with a building contractor, to saving a rodeo from a bunch of runaway bulls, saving this air train from a terrorist attack, and stopping a robber. It's essentially that. I know I'm sort of just listing off things, but that's really what happens in the comic. It's just, oh yeah, all these bad things happening, and Jane uses her powers to fix them. And I think, in terms of character development, it is a good demonstration of Jane's character growth, because she kind of goes from simply doing her own selfish desires to actually helping people, from, the suicide victim to the people that are attacked on the air train. And it does show her sort of growing more heroic and seeing that, oh, she has the ability to help people on this world, and she really should help them. So I like that element of it. She's also given a much better costume this time around, because it's kind of hard. I'll show you to what degree I can, but in her very first appearance, she just kind of had this green turtleneck with brown pants. It was a very nondescript costume. But going forward, I guess they decided to lean more into the comic book aesthetic, and gave her a much more alluring and provocative costume, and it's essentially just a. It's not a great one. It's just this white blouse with a red bottom skirt, but it's a little more distinctive. So I think they have a better idea for a costume there. Now, I will say the thing that did bug me about this issue is that it does feel like a really random event story. Because, like I said, it starts off with a guy committing suicide, and that somehow leads to a rodeo, which somehow leads to an air train, which somehow leads to a robber. And again, it's just random events. And even though I said that the story does sort of emphasize Jane's growth as a person and a hero, it honestly focuses more on those random events than Jane's growth. You don't really see how she reacts to it until pretty much the very end. And so it's kind of that thing of, the randomness of the events kind of distract from the character growth. And there's also a scene towards the end where she's used her powers to help people throughout this whole event. But the very last thing she uses her her powers to do anything with is not really for beneficial. It's more to play a prank on someone. Because there's this guy in the hotel lobby who's angry that his pen isn't working. And so he demands ink. So Jane decides, okay, and floods the hotel lobby with ink. And that's a strange scene because right after that is when she decides, oh, I should stay here on Earth to help people. And it's like, you just did a prank on a guy. I'm not really sure how that leads to you saying, oh yeah, I should stick around on Earth to help the people of the planet. It's like, that feels like something that maybe should have been done at the very beginning when Jane still had this kind of selfish mindset from the first issue. Like, that would have flowed better because you would have seen Jane starting off with this like selfish thing of like, oh, I'm gonna prank this guy because he's annoying me, to actively helping people like the suicide victim and the people in the rodeo. So yeah, that part felt kind of wonky, and could have been a little more better plotted. Issue number 3 is probably the best one in the series because it goes into full insanity. Because one of the things a lot of people enjoy about early comic books is the fact that a lot of these early comic book writers were hugely imaginative, but sometimes didn't think of more logical ways to do their stories, and thus you get these really out of nowhere weird concepts that are absolute lunacy. And issue number 3 of The Magician from Mars is a great example of that, because the story is, and this is all true, this happens in the story, this evil elemental demon from another dimension is brought to our reality because he hypnotizes a guy to play a certain tune on a piano at a concert that somehow draws him into our reality, and he's able to rain terror across America. Now, that sounds like an insane concept, because it is, but it's also a really fun idea. And I think the highlight of the story is this great fight between the Elemental and Jane, because they both, due to their powers, are able to grow the size of Kaiju, like they're Godzilla and King Kong. And they start fighting each other, just brute forcing, smacking each other. And it kind of plays out like a Godzilla film because you got these two giant figures fighting, but you also have this thing where the army shows up and tries to fight the elemental, and they just swipe them aside, which is again very much like a Godzilla film. So there's a very cool element there. If you're into kaiju films, that section has a very strong kaiju vibe. But that's the first half of the story. But the second half of the story actually has a really cool plot twist because the elemental and Jane can't destroy each other. The elemental is too powerful and Jane is too powerful. So we're stuck in a situation where the elemental briefly retreats, but he gets help from a mad scientist who starts kidnapping people to feed the elemental. Again, it sounds weird because it is, but it's kind of a fun halfway plot twist. And I also really like how Jane finally defeats the elemental because the story makes it clear that, yeah, brute force isn't going to destroy this guy. He's too powerful. So Jane is forced to use her wits and actually create a reverse force to beat the elemental. I won't say what it was, but it's the opposite of the way the elemental was brought into our reality. She uses a reverse force instead of just beating up the elemental. So that's a pretty cool way to defeat the main villain. I would say the one main issue of the story is that the professor himself doesn't get much time to shine. Like, that mad professor is kind of an interesting character, but because he's only brought in the second half when there's only 2 pages left in the story, he doesn't get much time to shine. So he's just kind of a character that's there, and we get an interesting idea with him, but we don't really get to see how he is as a character. So that's kind of the one downside of that issue. So for the fourth issue is actually the most, I would say, grounded and straightforward stories, because it basically involves Jane arriving at this airport, and she has to stop this villain called the Hood, who is terrorizing the airport by killing everybody around the airport with sonic blasts. Obviously, Jane is able to survive it. But I would say the one thing I really liked about this story is that there's a lot of good air battles. There's a lot of air battles between Jane and the Hood's henchmen. Even the Hood escapes at the end with a rocket ship. Slight spoiler, but he comes back in the next issue, so it's not that big a deal. So the air battles in that story are pretty good. But like I said, because it's the most straightforward of these issues and stories, it feels kind of rote, because it's just about Jane trying to figure out what the Hood is doing and trying to stop him. And again, that sounds like a regular superhero comic book story. And it is, and while some people might like that, I kind of feel like it loses the energy of the last issue, which was just completely insane. This next story was just kind of rote. It was like, okay, yeah, this is a story that any superhero could have themselves in. This doesn't feel like something the magician from Mars had to be involved in. So yeah, this one was just kind of bland to me. It was like, okay, yeah, it's in one ear, out the other. So in some ways it's the weakest one, simply because it doesn't really do much with the concept. It doesn't really go into the insane ideas that we've seen in the last couple issues. So yeah, I didn't much care for that one. So issue number 5, which is the final issue for the Magician from Mars. I say issue. Obviously, these are all Amazing Man comics. I should probably say story. So story number 5. This one involves Jane having to return to Mars to stop the Hood, who, as I said, escaped in the last issue, because the Hood has started a civil war on Mars, trying to overthrow the Martian king. And one of the things is that the Martian king wants to get the help of the Magician from Mars due to her powers, and to help them destroy this insurrection. So some of the things I liked about here is the fact that the story actually leans into the politics of this world, because Earth actually does not want to get involved in the Mars Civil War. They kind of look at it as this diplomatic issue that's outside their purview. And they actually keep Jane from going to Mars because they say, no, we're not letting you go. You're here on Earth. We are holding you here until the Martian conflict is over. Because they want to be so isolationist that they don't want to even let someone who is a native Martian go back to their homeland. So that's kind of an interesting element, and the fact that Jane has to sort of find a way to sneak out of Earth so she can get to Mars. That's kind of an interesting plot element in the first half. The second half I enjoyed because Jane now has a reputation as the Magician from Mars, but she has to actually step up to be a leader to the Martian army, and has to reintegrate herself with her own people after she spent so long away from them. And that's kind of an interesting idea of a half-Martian, half-Earth person trying to reestablish their homeland and sort of grow stronger with that and become a leader in their own right. I also think that the ending reveal about who the Hood is very effective. I won't say who it is, but it is somebody who's established in the earlier stories, and it actually does make a fair amount of sense. Especially because this character did something in a very early, in the first issue, that you watch it and you read that and you go, well, that doesn't make much sense. Why would they do that for this reason? But with this reveal, it suddenly makes sense why they did that. So, again, I have a suspicion that Giunta and Miranda probably didn't plan that aspect out, but they probably... but it was very clever writing on their feet, kind of going, okay, we have to reveal who the Hood is. We'll do this person. And just by the weird congruencies of their writing, it actually makes sense. So it's a pretty good reveal in that respect. Another thing I kind of enjoyed is that Jane's powers are very downsized by this point. They'd kind of been starting with issue number 4. Her abilities have been slowly toned down. Like, she still has a lot of them, and she has a certain amount of reality warping still, but there's very slowly being turned down. And that's effective because that means there's more of a threat to her. She has to, like I said in this one, she has to use a little bit of her powers to sneak off Earth, but a lot of it is sort of trickery and smaller scale manipulation. So, and when she's fighting the war on Mars, she has to actually think of tactics and think of ways to overcome the Hood's army. So, I like the fact that her powers are a little more downsized so that she actually has to do efforts in order to win the day, which was not something she had to do for the first 2 issues of this series. But I will say there were some problems of this concluding story. The biggest one to me is that there's meant to be this love interest with the Martian prince, the son of the Martian king. And it's meant to have this, I won't spoil what happens, but it has an ending that is somewhat tragic. And it just doesn't work because we don't really know anything about this Martian prince. So it just kind of feels like, oh, we have to give Jane an especially strong emotional moment in this story, but it doesn't necessarily have to make sense, which is weird because she already has an emotional moment in this story, even without the fate of the Martian prince. So it feels somewhat unnecessary, also. And I know I said a minute ago that I'm happy that Jane's powers are downsized in this story because it means she has to do a little more thinking and planning. But I also have to say that from a story perspective, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that Jane does not have as strong powers this time around, because the whole reason the Martian King wants Jane is that he's knowledgeable about her powers and her reality warping and her super strength and things like that. But as she's presented in this issue, she only has sort of a mild talent for a lot of these things. And it's kind of like, well, wait, why would the Martian King want this person who's only got, a mild talent of powers that might be useful in our war, instead of like this full-on reality warper that she's presented as initially in the first 3 stories, where that would make sense. You'd want that person on your side in a war. But this lesser powered Jane that we're shown in this issue, I can't really see somebody being like, oh yeah, we really need this person in our war. So again, it's a thing of, yeah, downsizing her powers works in the sense of building a better conflict, but it kind of also ruins the story logic of why the Martian King would want her to begin with. So again, it's kind of you gain one thing, you lose another based on the way the story is changed and the character's powers are changed. So the final ranking for The Magician from Mars. I rank on a 5-star system, 0 out of 5 being the worst, 5 out of 5 being the best. And I would probably give Magician from Mars a solid 2 out of 5 stars, which in my ranking is painfully average. Which is weird because you heard me talk about a lot of the insane things that happen in this comic, but I don't think it entirely works. And there is good stuff in this comic, but I found myself more often than not kind of being let down by a lot of the writing decisions. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 stars for being average and painfully average. In my verbiage, 2 out of 5 stars is painfully average. 3 out of 5 stars is pleasantly average. Painfully average is when I think something is average in a way that is more negative than positive. Pleasantly average is when I think something is average, but it's enjoyably average. This one, I kind of felt it was more painfully average than pleasantly average, because I think that it is kind of an interesting idea of somebody gaining these reality warping powers, and I do kind of like the idea of the character growth for Jane in those first 3 issues. But this one kind of has the problem a lot of those early comics had, where the story just does not have any idea about where it wants to go. It's very much all right, pick a scenario, let's do it, and we'll see what happens. And because it doesn't really know where it wants to go, uh, it feels very scattershot. And you have some great stuff like that third issue, but you also have some weird writing about Jane herself, and the plot itself just feels very Mad Libs. Like, okay, we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this, and it's just like, yeah, it feels very disconnected. And one of the biggest problems is that because in that first issue they make Jane so overpowered, they're kind of stuck in a scenario of going, well, we have to find a way to make a challenge for her or do something interesting with her. And they're able to in that third issue, but with the other issues in number 4 and number 5, they kind of have to fall back and be going, okay, she's not as powerful as we initially made her to be, just because the story would be over really fast if she had that power level she had in the first story. So it's just kind of a thing where the concept is kneecapped by having too overpowered a main character. So aside from the issue number 3, which I think is the only one that more or less fully works, everything else just kind of has this nasty sword of Damocles holding over, where it's like, well, why doesn't she just stop this with her reality warping powers? And it just kind of becomes this huge albatross that the concept just cannot shake, and thus the writers are kind of stuck through a good portion of this series, trying to figure out what they can do with a character who is this unstoppable. So, yeah, an interesting read, but I probably wouldn't dip that much into it. I can see why Prose Productions wanted to do a story, some short stories with her, because there are enough ideas here that I'm like, okay, you probably could do some interesting short stories with the character at different times in these issues. But as for but that's kind of because so many different elements of the character, and so scattershot that you can put virtually any idea in with this character. And yeah, it's just one of those things I go, yeah, I'm not sure how much that would work. So I do think people who are into those bizarre comics from the Golden Age, where everything is just sort of they're throwing everything on the wall and total lunacy is abounding. Anybody who's into like Fletcher Hanks, who was doing all those weird comics that were really bombastic and over the top and had these really weird concepts, you might be into a Magician from Mars. That this might be work for you. But I'm not sure it would really work for anybody else. I just think it peaks with issue number 3 with the insanity of the fight against the elemental, and then it just kind of drops off on the insanity level. Just kind of becomes an average space comic. So, yeah. Any inspiration? For those that don't know, I'm a working writer, and I like when I do these reviews to talk about whether these stories have inspired me in any way for my own writing. I have to say, I do like the idea of someone unlocking powers due to brain energy. Like I said in the beginning, that whole thing about, only 10% of your brain is used, that's a myth. Everybody knows that's a myth. But I do like that idea about somebody being able to unlock certain elements of their brain power and sort of gain powers through that method. I also kind of like the idea that somebody's brain is so developed that they can actually influence reality, with their mere brain power. That's kind of an interesting idea. Uh, in fact, reading this reminded me of that Luc Besson movie, Lucy, with Scarlett Johansson. That kind of had a similar concept where Scarlett Johansson's character is exposed to this drug that allows her access to 100% of her brain. And the whole point of it is that she gets all these amazing powers because she unlocks that brain power, essentially. And so I do think that if I was going to do a brain powered character, whether it was using the magician from Mars, because, like I said, she's public domain, or if I was making my own character, that kind of character would be great for like an action science fiction story. Kind of similar to this or Lucy, because, like I said, issue number 3, which is a lot of action, is where I think the series peaks. So that idea of mind over matter would be a very cool idea to do with Magician from Mars, or even an original action science fiction story. So this definitely got me thinking, which makes sense. It's a brain power story. So yeah, this did inspire me in a certain respect. So I'm definitely interested in that. Well, that is all I have to say about Magician from Mars. Uh, I will be doing a couple more reviews before Monday, because Monday I am leaving to go to Pulp Fest, which is next week. Not next week and next weekend. Not this coming weekend, but the weekend after next weekend. So keep your eyes out for that. I'm going to record a bunch of reviews and send them out, have them premiere while I'm at Pulp Fest. So that'll be my reviews while I'm gone. So keep your eyes out for that. I'm going to do a couple more Rocket Summer reviews, as well as some of the Jungle July reviews I was telling you guys about earlier this month. Gonna be a lot of reading in this next week, because I'm trying to get a lot of them done. But yeah, that'll be my main goal for the week upcoming, as well as preparing for Pulp Fest. So keep your eyes out for that. And I can't wait to talk some more books with you guys here in the coming days. All right. Bye.